All right, sweet. Okay, yeah. Today we're doing like epistemology, and specifically like language, but also more broadly like philosophy of language. Like the language and epistemology are like very intertwined in like the Indian tradition because like they're very big on linguistics and whatnot. Who does this sound interesting to? Okay, 2, 3, 4. All right, but like honestly, I thought this would sound more interesting than like the week we did literature, but I guess okay, all right. Icebreakers. Favorite noun. Actually, favorite word. It can be in any language. It can be in any language. And why? Tanuj.
I like lamentablemente in Spanish.
What?
Like lamentably.
Lamentable.
Lamentablemente. Or like trabajaba. Spanish has a lot of.
That's nice. That's nice.
Yeah.
Those words are like very phonetically motivated. It's okay if this word is phonetically motivated, but like also you can like it if it's like semantically interesting. Or it can be a phrase. It can actually also be a phrase. Who wants to go next? Sid.
I like the word
Tatish. Tatish. Okay, Tatish is this buffet place in Cancun. We used to go like every night last week during spring break. Next.
Wait, Mexico.
Yeah, in Mexico in Cancun.
You guys go to Taboo?
Taboo? No, what is that?
We were in Cancun last week too.
Oh, cool.
And
Whoa.
Taboo was a really good place. I was trying
Wait,
to
were you there in the city?
Yeah. Yeah, I think something ran into something. I saw you. I was
That's
really,
wild. I did not go out that night, but okay, cool. Next. Favorite word? Huh?
Does that be a real word?
It can be like a semi-real word.
I like the word. No, I like the word. Like usually, my friends and I have been saying badonka a lot. Badonka.
I think that counts as a real word.
Like a food.
Yeah. Like, okay, yeah, that's
It's just
fair.
fun to say.
That's true. Yeah, phonologically interesting. Yes, next. Ooh, favorite word, yes, Chris.
I really like the word synecdoche.
Synecdoche.
I used to think it was pronounced like synecdoche.
Synecdoche. Yeah. Synecdoche, yeah. That's like one of those like literary techniques, right? It'll be like copy and paste.
It's like so. Like an example would be like Cleveland won by 5 points, but by Cleveland they mean like the team.
Yeah. Okay, like this part representing the whole. Or, okay, interesting. Yes.
I don't know. I'm still like thinking about it. I feel like I was trying to think of something in like Hindi where there's like something that isn't easily translated, where like the meaning of it is like it's disrupted significantly when it's translated. But I don't know. I feel like I'm just not able to think of one.
One Hindi word that I like bugging Sid a lot with, like last semester, is tasalli. Like whenever we go to like eat food, and then he's like trying to leave, I'd be like tasalli say. It's like slowly, like chill out. It's like very easily to translate, but like it's like a Hindi word that I like. Yes. Huh? Oh, that's fire. That's a fire answer. Because it's like tomorrow and yesterday. Which is like weird, right? Like how does a word come to mean both tomorrow and yesterday?
It's also you always know which one.
Yeah. It's like entirely based on like pragmatic, right? Like based on the context. That's cool. Yeah.
I like the word cheers.
Huh?
I like the word cheers.
Cheers?
Yeah.
As in like cheers.
Yeah.
Why?
You know, like I mean, I used to always end my emails with like cheers.
Oh, that's like the worst email signature. I'm sorry.
And then a professor was like, dude, change it. But I like the way it sounds. I like the way it's spelled.
Yeah, it is a
Yeah.
chaotic good.
I saw like a word like chaotic, like you know the word with like
Yeah.
and then cheers was like chaotic neutral.
I'd say it's chaotic good. Like it's definitely like happy, but it's also like why.
Very sorry for like. I remember I had like apologize some teacher or something. So like I was talking like primary, like secondary school. Okay? Very sorry for talking class, won't repeat this behavior. Cheers.
Cool. I mean, Yashika.
I like the word.
Huh?
No one knows how to pronounce it.
Wait, what is the word?
Epitome.
Epitome. Epitome.
Epitome. It's the epitome of a word that no one knows how to pronounce.
Classic, classic. Yeah, it's weird. English has like a lot of these weird spelling kind of things. You have to know the etymology of a word to know how to pronounce it. Just sort of intriguing compared to other languages. Okay, who have I missed?
Me.
Yeah, Shakti.
I think like rendezvous, just because like when I was younger and I like first read it, I used to say it so incorrectly in my head.
Rendezvous.
And then I learned how it was pronounced. So I was so mind blown.
Yeah, that is a nice word. Lots of French.
I only learned like this year that lieutenant meant lieutenant.
No, lieutenant is like
It's
no. Lieutenant is like actually objectively like an Indian pronunciation. Like it's
No, it's British.
no like British. Yeah, it's like a British like it's a British English pronunciation. But now even in England they pronounce it as like lieutenant. A lot.
Yeah, but I thought like a lieutenant was a phrase consisting of two words.
Oh,
one being left, the other
lieutenant?
until like.
Interesting.
I thought it was just like a different position.
No.
I couldn't figure out what
Yeah.
colonel was.
Oh,
There's
gosh,
no-
I was so
Colonel, yeah. Okay.
Can I
Yeah.
volunteer a Hindi word?
Yes.
Chomu.
Huh?
Chomu.
Chomu?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
There's no way to translate it to English.
Weak node.
Oh, okay. So it's like a slang term.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair.
I'm using like physical appearance. So like your Joe had.
Ah,
In fact.
interesting.
Oh, there's a lot of adjectives in Hindi like that.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris, are you over here? Unto?
So it doesn't have to be English.
No.
Well, if I pick one in English, it would be forbearance, because it is like, that word is the epitome of like what I want to be as a person.
Hmm.
In Sanskrit, I really like the word dhamma, just because there isn't an exact meaning for it, but somehow everyone has a different attachment to it. At least everyone who knows it, whatever. I guess like the way I interpret it is kind of like a purpose of some sort, or like a personal endeavor. But like I said, there doesn't seem to be like exact translation. Yeah, and then I like Hensho.
Yeah, I mean, so like with dharma, like that's like a good kind of like we're gonna come back to it in the religion section, but like the meaning of that term has like evolved a lot over time. Like the root like dhar is actually from like this Proto-Indo-European head, which in Latin actually becomes like fumus. So it's almost like the firmament, right? Like the grounding, like the objective purpose that underlies everything, and that's more of how it's used in Vedic Sanskrit. But then later on, it becomes something different on this sort of sense of religious personal duty. With forbearance, there's actually a direct cognate of that in Sanskrit. Prabha anta.
That's like the beginning of my name.
Yeah. Oh no, but that's like a different. That's like a gerundial suffix. Yours is like actually like a different. Like this only serves a grammatical function. But like this literally means like it is etymologically the same as forbearance, but it means more to carry forth. Yeah. But yeah, interesting. Okay, cool. Anyone else?
Is there any intrigue in the last one I said?
Huh?
Is there any intrigue in the last one?
Yeah, I don't know the etymology of that one, unfortunately. Okay, cool. Anything else? Any other thoughts? Beast. Yeah, that's a word I like a lot. I adopted it at some point in like 11th grade.
I think
And
you're
I-
one of the only people from that friend group who still uses it.
Yeah, I don't know why. No, it's because when I went to UC Santa Cruz, my friends there were using it. So it like reinforced, and now I cannot break myself free. Okay. All right. What does it take to understand a sentence? If I say, give me the laptop, what does it require of you to understand what I want you to do? Like, I think it's very easy for us to decide on what like the meaning of give me the laptop is, right? Like, it's very easy for you to say, okay, that means that you want me to give me the laptop. But what does it take to understand that meaning? Thoughts?
First, we need to have a common ground for our laptop is, right?
Totally.
We hope you understand that you're referring to this and not the table or like anything each of
Yeah, Chris.
You sort of have to assume that like things in the universe are not static, so like you can actually like perform actions and stuff in order to like do something.
Yeah, that's also a very important kind of pragmatic concern. What about more on like a language level? Like, do we have to understand anything about like this? Do we have to understand anything about like the structure of language to be able to understand what "give me the laptop" means? Yeah, Milo.
Like, there could be some ambiguity, like, you knew all the words meant, but you didn't know saw was referring to like me or the marker. You can't say the arbitrary marker.
Exactly, right? Like we have to be able to put things together. We have to understand that I don't want me to give you the marker. I don't want the marker to give me to you, right? I want you to give me the laptop, right? So there's like this syntactic component of this. And we do this very naturally, right? We don't have to think about this at all. It comes entirely implicitly that when we see sentence words in some order, we understand the relationship between those words. So this is like a traditional concern of like psycholinguistics and syntax, like how we understand these relationships between words based on word ordering and based on grammar. Any other thoughts here? Anything else that might take to understand this? Yeah, Yashka.
I was going to say that in order to understand the sentence, like if you're reading it and trying to understand it, your brain, for some reason, at least mine, ends up rephrasing it as "you give the marker to me." And so just to know that like "you give the marker to me" gets shortened to "give me the marker" somehow, and like having that implicit understanding is important to know what like that specific, I guess, form of that sentence.
Exactly, right? With these commands, a lot of the times we drop out some supposedly relevant information.
I think context matters for certain sentences where you're supposed to figure out how to group the words or which words modify other words. Like if you say, "I rode my car from California," you want to see if like "from California" is the place you were driving from, or if it's trying to describe where the car is from. So there's kind of
Yeah, exactly. There's like multiple different syntax parsers, right? I rode my car from California, or I rode my car from California.
Yeah, and then you can add like "to" and then another place.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. All right, so let's jump into some questions, not about syntax, but we'll start with a more basic level with words, right? So what do words refer to? There's this traditional kind of question about like particulars versus universals, right? So we have a particular of like this phone right here, or we have phone, as in like this phone, that phone, right? Phone can refer to like this, or it can refer to the unit, like this particular, or it can refer to this universal class. So the Sankhya school says words always refer to particulars, which they call vyakti. Is this absurd? If I talk about, for example, phones allow you to make calls, is it not absurd to say that that the word phone then only refers to particulars, or is it completely logically straightforward? Were you gonna say something? Oh, okay.
What does it mean to be particular?
To be a particular is like a specific instantiation in the real world, like a phone, like this phone or this laptop, right?
Is this only for nouns?
That's a harder question we can get into in the future, but I mean, like, I jumped, right? Like,
I mean, it is absurd, right? Because we can talk about abstract concepts, not like objective.
But they'd argue that those abstract concepts are then referring to specific abstract concepts, right? So if we're talking about
If you say ideas are good, how would you instantiate that?
ideas are good.
It's not something.
Oh yeah, exactly. So the hard part there is ideas, right?
Yeah.
But it's completely fair for them to say goodness is referring to the particular good of ideas, right? Does that make sense?
I'm not raising my hand.
Okay. Cool. All right. So this is somewhat absurd, I think, and this is what other schools think as well. I think it's sort of obscured by the fact that in Sanskrit you don't have determiners, right? You like by default you have, so a determiner is like or the. So like for example, when I say the phone, it's clear that I'm referring to a particular. I say the phone is red. That means that I'm referring to a particular phone being red. But if I say a phone is red, okay, this is a bad example because like, all right, that's still a particular. Or actually it depends on, it's more pragmatic here, right? If I say a phone is red, if I switch this out for a situation where it's like universal, right? Like, what is a crab, right? Then it sort of makes more sense. But regardless, this question about particulars and universals seems to be obscured by the fact that there's a lot of weird intermingling of like context, right? If it is a universal property, we're often going to assume that the word is referring to a universal like this. But if it's not a universal property, right, not all phones are red, then we often won't assume it to be universal. So more complex kind of theories are required. So before getting into the more complex theory, we'll look at a couple of universal theories. So the Jainas who respond to the Sankhyas say that no, actually these words refer to akriti, which is like form or shape. So for example, when we say cow, we're referring to the shape of like cows, something about cows. And the Nyaya who go on to create a more complex theory, they say that's incorrect because, for example, we can have a clay cow, right? And we still refer to it as a cow, but it's like, it's in the shape of a cow, but it's nothing like a cow, right? It doesn't give milk, it doesn't do all these other things. Or we can also have like a gold necklace, right? We can have a gold necklace and we can say, this is gold. And that's not in the shape of gold, right? Like it's just made out of gold, but it's in the shape of a necklace. But we can still refer to it with this term. So that means that this akriti, this form theory must also be incorrect. The Bhattamimamsa school says that instead they don't have this idea of akriti, they generalize it more slightly. So they don't even talk about what specifically about a class is like the general form. They just say there's some universal property, right? Let's say all phones share some universal property. We're not even going to specify what the universal property is, but we're going to call that a jati. And we're going to say that when we say the word phone, we're referring to this universal property of phoneness. And the Nyaya says that like, where do the particulars come from then, right? Like if I go and I refer to this specific phone, how can I refer to this specific phone if I only have access to, if my word only refers to the universal property? So then we're going to arrive at like the sort of high end of word reference theory in Indian philosophy, which is the Jati Vishishta Vyakti theory. Can anyone else try saying this? Jati Vishishta Vyakti at the top right. Volunteers. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's an important thing to note that the two S's, like this first one is a palatal S, and the second one is a retroflex. So this is like your tongue is in the same place as the, as in like damata, and this is the same place as in like ja, as in jamuch. So that like shish, this is like shish. It's not shish. But okay, phonetics a lesson aside, yeah, they like constructing these long complex terms for their theories, and there's going to be an even longer term a couple slides down. Okay, but this theory is basically a particular qualified by universal. So like jati vishishta means like qualified by a universal, right? Vishishta means like qualification, like qualified non-dualism, vishishta advaita. So jati vishishta means qualified by universal, and then vyakti, particular, right? So when we speak of a word, the meaning of the word is that it refers to a phone in the context or by as being qualified by universal, right? I can call this a phone, I can call this a mobile device, I can call this a gadget, and I'm referring to this particular, but it's being qualified by this universal jati that I'm talking about. Intentional versus extensional definitions. Anyone here taken like type theory courses? I'm looking at Chris. Okay. Intentional versus extensional. Intentional or like anyone who's taking like logic courses. Okay, intentional versus extensional definitions. An intentional definition is one that defines a certain property and uses that property to define a class, right? So for example, we can say the class, an intentional definition would be like, so this is like, can anyone tell me what this is the definition for? Yeah, the set of evens, right? And this is our intentional definition, this is our intentional definition. Alternatively, we can construct a set that we just do this. So this is an intentional definition and this is an extensional definition because the extensional definition includes, like, it is literally defined by referring to all the possible particulars, whereas the intentional definition is defined by referring to a specific jati, right? A universal property. So like, I argue that there's like a very close tie between this and like this is a VFD, this is a VFD. Yeah, I'd say there's like an interesting kind of parallel there. Symbol grounding. Let's not get into that. OpenAI clip and concept spaces. This is a more interesting kind of parallel. So has anyone heard of OpenAI clip? So OpenAI clip is a huge kind of like very popularized kind of like deep learning model published by OpenAI in like 2021. Yeah, 2021. Where basically they take words and if you look at the diagram over here, they take words and images that are paired with the words on the internet and they push them into the same representation. So basically, if you have an image of a rabbit and the word rabbit, you have this huge neural net. How should I draw that? Okay. This is a neural net. And it's going to take this. Okay, I don't like the way I did this. You're going to have one neural net over here. You're going to have one neural net over here. The word is going to go in here. The image is going to go in here. And the model basically learns to push this into the same high dimensional space. So basically you have a 768 dimensional space, like this vector space is standard like embedding space. And it's going to basically learn to push the word rabbit over here and then learn like some cloud around that word that includes all your image embeddings. So this embedding might go over here, right? This image embedding might go over here. We might have other rabbits, images of rabbits all over the place over here. But our word is like over here. So what does this mean? Like this basically means that, does this make sense actually? Is this confusing anyone? Okay. What this means is that when we say when we're referring to a particular, when we go out and say, look at the rabbit, basically like we can argue that what we're doing is that we are referring to a particular as qualified by this space. And this space I'm going to say is like the jati, right? Like this is literally like the model internally learns a jati, a universal property, an intentional definition, right, in its weights. It learns some intentional definition of the weights that results in an extensional definition over all the points of rabbits in this space, right? So in a very interesting way, it does the exact same thing as jati vishishta vyakti, in that it qualifies each particular by its universal property by putting it in this concept space. Thoughts on this parallel? Is this complete bullshit? Like, am I completely pulling parallels out of my ass? Or is there something more to this? Or does anyone have any other interesting parallels to draw here? Any thoughts on like whether machine learning and like neural nets or like natural language processing is like even a valid means to go about defining meaning, like word meaning?
Have you heard like word to that?
Yeah.
It's kind of similar to this. I think that made a little bit more sense to me. But basically, if you're trying to find similarities between different words, you assign each word a whole bunch of, imagine like a list of numbers, each one representing a vector. And so then you can compare qualities of the word with other words to eventually find out which ones are similar to other ones. It kind of makes a cloud like this. Of similarity.
Yeah, exactly. So word2vec is kind of a classical algorithm from around 2011, 2012. Basically, word2vec looks at huge text documents, and based on the context of each word, it learns a vectorial representation of that word. And it turns out that when you train word2vec on these huge corpora of English text, it learns representations that are surprisingly like semantically meaningful. So for example, if you take the vector for king, subtract the vector for man, and then add the vector for woman, you get the vector for queen. Yeah, exactly, right? So this is, that's like another kind of approach to lexical semantics. The hard thing there is that, and this is sort of a longstanding problem in deep learning, is that, or like natural language processing, is that when you're working with these huge text corpora, you only have access to words, right? Where you only have access to language. Whereas in the real world, when we use language, we're using language in the context of actual physical environments, right? These grounded particulars. So that's like a huge problem, I think, in NLP right now, is that we're only dealing with words in this amorphous context, like snatched away from its grounding in the real world. And that's what work like Clip and all this other multimodal research is trying to do. Cool. Okay, any other thoughts here? Yeah.
So I noticed that it's like very new development, like 2021. So like, what did people? Well, was there anything like this before? What people like, better answer the same?
Yeah. So I mean, if you're asking in terms of multimodal representations, I think there's like deep learning work on representing images and words in the same space back from like early 2000s as well. But it really wasn't shown to be effective because we just didn't have the computer data for it until the last couple of years. Yeah, does that answer your question? I mean, like, do you mean even like further back? Like, okay. I guess like I will say that like semantics has always been hard, right? Because like we used to do a lot of formal semantics, and like formal semantics is still a thing. But with formal semantics, you basically are restricted to dealing with these symbolic representations. And I guess I sort of see this broader shift in AI where like historically we've been doing a lot of symbolic stuff, right? In the 60s and 70s, they used to do all this formal semantics, symbolic manipulation, as well as these expert systems that could do artificial intelligence. But nowadays we see a lot more of these like connectionist deep learning models. Just like we saw these other kind of processes like syntax and whatnot go from we saw syntax go from the domain of symbolic processing into the domain of connectionist models, right? And I think the same thing is going to happen with these semantic models, that they're going to go from the domain of symbolic processing. Now they're in the domain of like these like word2vec models, but I think they're going to go even further into the domain of like these grounded multimodal semantic representations. Okay, maybe a bit of a tangent. Any other final thoughts on this slide?
So like,
Chris.
Do like points closer to the like the word have any like is there any significance like the metric? Like is there any significance like a metric?
Sort of. This is like sort of my research right now, like topological characterizations of these like multimodal embedding spaces. I can't tell you right now, partly because there's also like a data constraint, right? Like we just don't have like that many pictures of rabbits. But yeah, I'm not sure. It's a very interesting question though.
It's supposed to be theory, right?
Huh?
Like the closer it is to the particular, like the closer it is in terms of understanding or whatever.
Yeah, like I'd hope, right? Like I guess the ones that are closer to this are going to look more like a rabbit. But let's say we have like the word dog over here, right? Maybe the rabbits over here sort of have like smaller ears and like bigger paws or like something like that, right? They look more dog-like.
Does it just have to be in terms of like look? Like you can set it to do whatever you want.
What do you mean?
Like, that only applies to nouns, right? But this in theory should work for all sorts of words. You're just trying to connect them in whatever attributes you set, whether that's like how the thing looks versus what it means or what it like.
I mean, that's the question, right? Like, what is there to meaning outside of not just looks, right? But like, there's a lot of domains of meaning, right? Like how things look, how things sound, and obviously there's some kind of like mental representations as well, right? Like there's analogies that are entirely non-visual.
Yeah.
Like people, Jeff Hinton brought this up. People associate dogs with males and cats with females. Like, is there anything like explicitly visual about that? Like, I'm not so sure. But like there is some kind of like underlying analogy that like an analogization process that's happening there. And that seems to show up because of like word co-occurrence, right? Like you can even do this like with word effect and you get like similar analogy results. You were asking about, oh, whether this has to be explicitly visual. I mean, with OpenAI Click, specifically, they're learning these like visual semantic embeddings. So that's what they're doing here. But you could have other embedding models that are learning like other features, I guess, right? Like if you're working with purely textual models like word to vec.
Like if you had a painting, for example, would it be considered similar to other forms of art that aren't paintings, even though they look completely different, for example?
Other forms of art that aren't paintings? What do you mean?
Like if you have a painting and a sculpture, would they be close-ish together?
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine it's something like this. You probably have a subspace in your embedding space that's like artwork. And then you have like sculptures over here.
But artwork isn't visual in the slightest. Right?
Why not?
Well, because it doesn't have to look similar at all to a painting. It can be a sculpture, it can be all sorts of things.
But like visual similarity, like that's like visual similarity is a very broad term, right? You can have a picture of a rabbit that is like this, right? And it's like you see the entire face and everything, whatever. And then you can have like another picture that's like hyper realistic or something like that. I don't know. But it's like just the okay. Those are whiskers. Here's the eye. Okay, great. That's like somehow a rabbit. But like these would both show up in the space for that looks nothing like a rabbit. But these are both going to show up in the space for rabbit. Like this could be on like a red background. This could be like sitting on a boat in the ocean. Like who knows? But the point is that like it's still going to recognize them both as like part of the same like class, right? The same property. That's not because of like visual similarity. It's because it's recognizing some underlying semantic properties of this.
Yeah.
It's recognizing that they're both rabbits, and that's why they're in the same space. Right. So I mean, it's the same thing for artwork. That like your like artwork can look like all kinds of different things, but if your model is good enough, it's going to recognize that all of these different things, which look very different, are all sculptures, and sculptures for semantic reasons are quite similar to I don't know, like architecture or like paintings or something like that. So yeah, cool. Does that answer your question? All right, cool. Any other thoughts here? Okay. Oh, it's already 7:40. Oh no. All right, sentence meaning primacy. Okay, so we talked about word meaning, right? But it turns out that like some people think that like word meaning is not primary. Instead, they think sentence meaning is primary. So Bhartrhari, which is a philosopher from the 500s, he basically says he has this thing called Spota Theory, which basically says that like sentence meaning is unitary. There are no words. Words are like invented by grammarians to explain like certain regularities about the world. And like an example, like this isn't an example he gives, but like an English language example would be like, he says that looking at a word like Socrates and analyzing it by looking at the meanings for sock, rat, and ease is like absurd, right? It wouldn't make sense to explain words by going out and pulling out all these subcomponents. So then why do we do that for sentences? Sentences have like, he says that sentences have unitary meaning, and then we go in and we try to pull out the subconstituent words that we think would explain the entire meaning of the sentence. And he says this is like stupid, like we shouldn't do this. And like it, like I don't completely understand this argument. I think one kind of I'll go into that later, but like an example would be like non-compositional phrases, right? So we can say red wine and red rose, right? Like imagine a red rose in your head and compare it to compare the color of that to a red wine. Like what is the colors of those? Huh?
I hate Fantasia. I like it.
Oh, okay. Oh no. Curious.
Wait, are you trying to like ask us?
Yeah, like is the color of red wine the same as like?
No, I think red wine is a lot. It's like a little bit more violent, like darker than red. Like the red of the rose is like it's a bit more scholarly, like lighter. Like
Right?
lighter.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean exactly, right? Like you have these like non-compositional phrases, right? For like there's the word red in both red wine and red rose, but the meaning of the colors in those phrases are completely different. So he says that like red wine has like a unitary meaning, red rose has a unitary meaning, and you going in there and saying sock rat's ease is like basically the same thing as trying to pull out this word red and say something meaningful about that. It's like a futile attempt. I think this is like, I don't know. I think what he might be getting at is that there's statistical regularities. So like, for example, there's words that you can actively pull out components and say meaningful things about, right? So we can say, we can look at, I'm trying to look for a word on my page. Okay, grammarian, right? So grammarian.
What issue did he take with you, like with there being allowed to be both? They can have sentences where the individual words make sense, and ones that are like idioms where individual words have nothing to do with the phrase. Like, what's the issue with saying they both?
That is basically the viewpoint. Actually, no, that is a viewpoint that I don't think is actively taken in Indian philosophy. The textbook actually does talk about it, and there's definitely like it's very much a significant part of the cognitive linguistic tradition in the West. I'm sure it's floated by someone, but I think he takes this almost for more ideological grounds. But let me just finish this example, right? With grammarian, we can pull out grammar, and that's like an active component, and we can pull out Ian, which we take to mean like it's a suffix for like someone who does something, right? Or like someone who believes in something. And those are like good components. But if we pull out like Graham and like Marianne, that's like not gonna work. Similarly, there's like sentences in which we can pull out these components, and there's sentences in which we can't pull out these components. And I guess what he's getting at is that like you can't always pull out these components of sentences, and you're not going to always have satisfactory compositional models for how words come together. Did you want to finish your thought?
Like, I don't get what's like unique about that. Like, isn't that just objectively true? Where like certain sentences, you have words that, you know, a red sock means a sock that is red, but an idiom, like whatever idiom where the single words don't contribute to the overall meaning. It don't work like that. Like, isn't that just objectively true? But I guess I don't know what the difference in theories that actually make sense are.
I guess, well, so when you have a theory, right? I mean, that is at a high level a true statement, but when you're constructing a linguistic theory, you want to have explanatory power, right? If you're simply saying some sentences are compositional, other sentences aren't compositional, that doesn't really give you the predictive power to be able to say, why are some sentences compositional, and can we decide when a sentence has compositional meaning? So since you don't have that predictive power, you're sort of forced to take either end of the aisle, right? You're either forced to say sentences are completely non-compositional and we must look at their meaning from this outsider unitary perspective, or we must take a view sort of more like Anvitabhidhana, yeah, okay, so let's move into this other theory. So the Prabhakara Mimamsa school takes this other view called Anvitabhidhana. Anyone want to try saying this word? There's two aspirated consonants here, the bha and the dha. Anvita bhidhana. And the etymology of this is, oh, what's up? The etymology of this is anu ita abhidhana, which means, so like the first component is like anvita, which means like following, and abhidhana means like it means like denotation, like close, putting close. So it literally means like the denotation of that which follows together. Sort of like the denotation of the connected meanings. Or like yeah. Okay, so all right, no one's gonna try saying this because it's too long. Okay, words are, so the theory here is that words are semantically incomplete, but like have a core. So he says, so like we'll say for example that, do you have an example here? No, okay, so dog has like, we can very easily think of like the meaning of dog, right? But the Prabhakaras will say that like that's actually like an incomplete meaning. That image you have in your head is like incomplete, and like the meaning is completed when we put it into a sentence. So the dog eats. Now it's a complete sentence, and now the meaning, the partial meaning of dog is fulfilled by the partial meaning of eats. So it's almost like this is like a part. This is like a part, and then like this is a part, and they all glue together into the whole, right? So that's like sort of what this theory is like. So there's actually a lot of interesting proposals that are similar to this. There is a distributed compositional categorical grammar, something like that, which was published in like 2011. And they basically have this similar theory where you can assign vectors to individual words, and then you connect the words together with these like subcompositional phrases based on like categorical grammar, which is this syntactic formalism. And then the words combine their meaning, and then you end up with this whole. And I guess to an extent, this is what a lot of modern semi-symbolic approaches to like. Okay, so let's look at another kind of extension of this. We have Jeff Hinton. Does anyone know Jeff Hinton? Okay, Jeffrey Hinton is like the forefather of AI, and you guys are all at CMU, and like you should be like ashamed that you don't know that. So like Jeffrey Hinton, Joshua Bengio, Yan LeCun. Memorize these three names so that like when you go and talk to some SCS kid, you don't get made fun of. Yashika, you fucking ashamed me. Who else here is SCS? Who else here is SCS? Raise your hand. Okay, yeah, Yashika, shame on you. Okay, so Jeff Hinton has this model called GLOM. Okay, so like GLOM stands for, I actually don't remember what it stands for, but he published it in like 2021. Lots of 2021 papers here. He's basically in retirement now. Like this is like right before he goes into retirement. It was basically like, I don't really have any empirical experimental basis for any of this, but like I have this like big brain idea. Here's like a 40-page paper. Here, there's zero experiments in it. He just like goes on and on like talking about like how cool it is, and then he like retires after that. So it's like I fudge. But so GLOM, the way GLOM basically works is that you have these things that arise called islands of identity. So you have like the dog eats, and basically how it works is you have these like units that go up. So these are each going to go up, and then you have this thing called you have these like contrastive losses that encourage certain cells to, like certain of these vertical cells to start converging in meaning. So we probably expect first the dog to converge in meaning. So this basically means that this is going to be equal to this. Like the vector here is going to be equal in representation to this. And then after this, we'd expect all of these to converge in meaning. So basically, you have these like islands of identity, as he calls them, where as we continue processing a sentence or an image, so GLOM can apply to anything. Like the paper describes it mainly in a visual context. But when we talked to him at the student panel last week or a couple of weeks ago, he like extended it to linguistic context. The basic idea is that you have subcomponents that are semantically meaningful constituents, like the dog, and the dog then converges upon an island of identity. And it turns out this is exactly what the Prabhakarans theorize in their Untitled theory. They basically say that the meaning of these individual words converges together into such that you have synecdoche actually, such that each individual word in the context of a sentence has the exact same meaning as every other word in the sentence. So what they basically say is that like without this sentence, dog just means like it's an incomplete meaning, and like it doesn't have like an entire meaning by itself. As soon as you put it in this sentence, like the meaning of dog is the same as the meaning of the and the meaning of eats, and all those meanings are like this complete meaning. So you have like this top down and like bottom up kind of like information flow, which is like what you have in this as well. I haven't completely understood the like nature of this GLOM neural architecture, but it turns out there's like top down like information flow as well, something like this. I didn't really understand that part, but that's the general idea. It's very interesting how I mean, there's no empirical basis for this yet, right? Like no one is like some people have tried implementing this. I don't think anyone's run implementations for natural language. But like it's interesting how the idea of how subsentential words will contain the entire sentence meaning that like emerges both in like Indian philosophy like 700 BC or 700 AD actually, as well as like GLOM published like literally last year. And then there's the Apoha theory, which is actually the same word as the top word, except the subcomponents are flipped. So like abhita is like the same like etymological word as like abhitana. The dha and the hita are actually both from the root dha. And then anvita and anvaya are like also like semantically equivalent. But this is like a more traditional theory in which we basically say that individual words, denotations, like their meanings, are complete on their own, and then they just get connected in the form of a sentence, which is like much more kind of like a traditional kind of view, right? Each word has a meaning, and then we just put them together. Questions? Or thoughts or opinions, Chris?
I guess like obviously I've read this for so I don't really understand it as much as or even. But like I don't seem to really buy that like dogs would somehow be able to be like the meaning of it would be like equivalent to like the other ones. Like I just don't see how that like. But like if you look at the like on its own, there's like no way you can drive the like okay like that's obvious. But like is he trying to say that like in some sort of like more meta sense it's like equivalent equivalent.
No, I mean, he's literally saying if you take the neural representation for each and you process them in their own context, the neural representation for each word will converge upon the same representation.
This is just for this sentence.
No, for all sentences. Like for all grammatical sentences, every subcomponent of meaning as it is processed through your GLOM is going to converge on these islands of identity.
But isn't the identity just for that sentence?
I mean, like the particular, like the specific representation over here is only going to be over here, right? Is that what you're saying?
Okay.
Like if you have, like obviously the representation of, like we're using circles over here, but like if we have the sentence, the cat runs, it's going to be like triangles or whatever, right? It's going to be like a different like vectorial representation.
So you can't like draw information about like the word being equal to dog equal to eats outside of the sentence itself, right?
Exactly. Like if we go and put the word the in another sentence, the representation we get here is not going to be the same as the representation we get for the in the other sentence. Yeah, exactly. Mario?
I might have missed this before, but how does models like this from an emphasis? So like sentences like I didn't poison him or I didn't poison him, I didn't poison him. Those types of things.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of NLP right now is entirely on the textual level, right? So you miss out on a lot of these segmental or like pragmatic features of like tone and whatnot. There is work out of Facebook from a couple of years ago of an end-to-end model where they do all the way from voice recognition. They take this huge like neural net, they input this like voice, and then at the other end they output these very high level features like segment analysis, as well as like meaning representations and stuff. So in there, I think they might have found that like you have like information being typed around on those kind of bases, right? That like you have information about tone and like sarcasm and everything being typed from these very low level speech recognition layers to these higher level meaning layers. Cool. Any other thoughts? Cool. Oh, how did I switch slides? Okay, cool. Yeah, cool. Okay, pragmatic concerns. Oh, wait, I didn't finish. Oh yeah, I mean, one thing about the Spota theory is that he also thinks that like they like burst forth in a flash of light, which I'm also sort of unconvinced by, and I think like psycholinguistics also has like interesting things to say about that. So pragmatic concerns, right? So we talked a lot about semantics, right, which is like the meaning of sentences, sort of void of all the subtleties of real life, right? Like exactly what Mario was talking about, that you have the way people say something, the specific context, right? Like the objects that we're surrounded by. All of these are more pragmatic concerns. There's like three kind of useful terms that these philosophers of language use. There's first akanksha, which is like syntactic expectancy. We should expect things to purely on a grammatical level be mutually expectant, right? Like they should be a grammatical sentence. You have yogyata, which is like semantic aptness. Like a famous example of this is like colorless green ideas sleep furiously. That's something which has akanksha, right? Which like it is syntactically valid. Colorless green ideas sleep furiously, but it is not semantically appropriate. It doesn't have yogyata. Then the third kind of category they put on this is tatparya, which is like pragmatic intention. So like what this means is that like we construct these sentences based on like some underlying intention or meaning that we want to convey to someone else, right? That intention may or may not be directly what shows up at the surface level language. So the Nyaya school says that like the intention of like what I want to say like supersedes the intention. I'm playing around with the words here on purpose. Maybe like has anyone here read any like Derrida or like deconstruct like post-structuralism? Okay, yeah, right. So like playing around with the words here. This is like something a Mimamsaka would do. But the basic idea, like in the first word intention, I'm using in the context of like what someone intends to do, and then intention, I'm using in the context of like an intentional definition. But we're like just using it in the context of meaning in general over here. But the Nyayaka would say that the intention that someone means for a sentence sort of like supersedes like the meaning, the intention of a sentence. So if I say like this is like sort of sarcasm, right? If I'm being very sarcastic, the intention of the sentence is going to be superseded by my intentions. Did I see a hand on that? No. Oh yeah, Chris.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna ask, like, for like like is that something like when you say smart kids go to school, and like it definitely has like some type of meaning and semantic meaning, but then like it doesn't make sense at the pragmatic level.
Yeah, I guess that would be valid. Alternatively, you could analyze it as saying as like having a semantic meaning, but like the semantic meaning is just false. Maybe like a pragmatic, like something without pragmatic intention would be like give me like could you please give me the could you please give me the Tower of Learning? Like, could you please hand me the Tower of Learning? Right? Like that has like semantic meaning, but it's like pragmatically, like how is that like feasible or like does it even make sense? So the Mimamsas and Vedantins on the other hand say that like intention is intention. Like the meaning someone has for a sentence is identical to what the sentence is. There might be suprasegmental features like that are included in the intention of a sentence, but that's still part of the intention of the sentence. And like my intentions should be entirely captured within the sentence, and that's basically what they derive from like the fact that they look at so many of these literary texts, right? If you go to the Vedas, right, you don't know what the original intentions of the writers of the Veda are, but you do know the intention of the words, and we should be able to then derive their intentions based off of the intention that we read off the text. Lots of wordplay here. Was that like understandable though? Like, like I don't know. Yeah, sure.
So first of all, so like in my like subjective versus objective philosophy process last semester, like we also struggled with like differences between the intention and the essence. Like, we just like never talked about like the essence.
Okay.
Sorry, that's like
Yeah.
I think it's just a problem.
Yeah, it's a long-standing problem, right? Like, how do you like pragmatics versus semantics? I guess, right?
And the second thing I want to ask, so like, well, what's if the minus?
Oh, that's a tilde equals. It's like, oh, I'm just saying like it's like approximately equal. Like that's not supposed to have an equal meaning. I'm just saying that they're like the Mimamsakas and Vedantins say that like maybe like it shouldn't even be there. Like maybe they make it exactly equal, right? Intention is like basically equal to intention. Okay, cool. Is there a question / comment / thought here? Oh, yeah, exactly. I mean, wait, like bring up this thought.
So when you have mathematical expressions, sometimes they boil down, you know, like 4 + 4 can be reduced to 8. And then there's some expressions that are equal to each other that don't go through that process of reduction. So you can say that they're extensional equivalent.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So extensional equivalence comes from the exact same thing, right? That like the definition. So like X.
Yeah,
We
those
could-
are extensionally equivalent.
Yeah, like these two are essentially equivalent, but we can also have another intentional definition that's going to be essentially equivalent. So for example, we could have a recursive definition, right, that like starts with 0 and then like double succession or something like that. And that's going to be extensionally equivalent. Here, wait, like this. 0. Oh wait, X such that X equals 0 or suck. X. Right? Is that right? Right? Yeah. So these are like essentially equivalent, even though they're different intentions, right? The intention is different because oh yeah, the intention with an S is different. There's no plug here. I don't know how like any of the instructors do it. All right, see, I said. Okay, beautiful. All right. Okay, then we also have like Mimamsa Bhavana theory. They basically have like a very sophisticated language that they use to describe the ways that people become convinced to like take actions. So like we've talked about like the Brahmanas, like the literature, the body of literature known as the Brahmanas, which basically have these ritual kind of demands, right? Like these commands to like make people perform certain actions, right? Like you should sacrifice to get to heaven, right? So they basically developed this like pretty complex speech act theory that basically describes all these different like bhavanas, which are like pieces of the pie in the grander scheme of how a word or utterance, like how something goes from an intention in the head to becoming an action in the world, right? So you have like the intention and then you have like the utterance, and then you have the person who hears the utterance, and then the person who hears the utterance has like a mental cognition. It's like, oh, I should do this, and then they go and perform the action. And they basically describe like this entire psychological process based on all these like pragmatic speech act theory kind of concerns. Yeah.
Like I think non-so also has like is that like the same?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm using speech act theory in the Western context, right? Like it's very similar to, I'm not sure whether John Searle might have been the speech act theory guy. I mean, like there's a lot of people who sort of discuss speech act theory in Western linguistics. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Okay. Yeah. The rabbit horn does not exist. Why does this make sense? Does this make sense? Like, does it? Raise your hand if you think this makes sense. The rabbit horn does not exist. Shahzadi, you think rabbit horns exist? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, well, like, do you think it has truth value? Like, do you think we can evaluate the truth value of this sentence, right? Can we clearly say it is true that the rabbit horn does not exist? Or can we also say it is false that the rabbit horn does not exist?
I don't think we can
Hmm.
do
We'll be getting into that next week, actually, like ontology. But okay, yeah, Tanuj, do you have thoughts?
There's a specific way to philosophy, and it basically says that like lots of different objects can have different properties, but the existence isn't one of those properties. Or existence isn't a predicate, so you can have different words that describe something, but its existence isn't a word that actually describes it.
Interesting, interesting.
Existence can't be a predicate.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like forms of like Montagovian grammar where they allow you to put existence as a predicate.
Otherwise, you can like break someone's brain by saying like, it is false that this thing exists,
Uh-huh.
and then I'll find a good example.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I only say that because I think my next slide has existence as a predicate, but we'll see. Any other thoughts here? The rabbit horn does not exist. So, oh yeah, Chris.
Yeah, it's not really clear how and also uses drop, like it's like some singular like it's not saying rabbit horns like that. Horns that are like
Yeah, the horn.
it depends on like what
Okay, yeah, all right. I guess that's fair. So in Sanskrit, this compound is called a Tatpurusha compound. So like the first is always a genitive and the second is a nominative, which basically means this is like a compounded way to say the rabbit's horn. So the rabbit's horn. You can read that as the rabbit's horn, but as like one word. Oh, okay. Well, let me ask this question. Do rabbits have horns? Raise your hand if you think rabbits have horns.
I was trying to find a picture of just like the one rabbit in the West that had horns. Like that's why I was like, oh my goodness.
Is it still a rabbit if it has horns? Or is it some like ungodly creation? Oh no.
I like this GMO corn steak one. Is a flying car still a flying?
We get into very blurry territory here. Yeah. Was there a thought? Okay. Yeah, so I guess like what they're getting at here is that rabbitness is defined by like not having horns. Like rabbits just like don't have horns. And if we postulate, if we say rabbit horn, we are implicitly postulating the existence of a rabbit horn in order to negate it, right? Yeah, Tanuj.
So real quick, if rabbit horn doesn't exist in nature, but we define it, you know, to have some properties, and then existence is a predicate, then we can say that exist a horn is a horn that's red and exists, and then that gets really weird, because then you can't prove it doesn't exist. Its property is that it exists. That's why existence can be a property. of-
Ah, I see. I see. Okay, okay. So we'll look into this more in depth in the next slide. Okay, good. John.
Like, what if I like made something and just called it a rabbit hole? Like, then there's it.
Some grammarians would say that there are explicit, like the meanings of words are defined by social conventions, and simply calling something a rabbit horn doesn't make it a rabbit horn. You'd have to convince all like 800 million English speakers, which is like going to be hard, right? So the rabbit horn does not exist. Okay, so let's look slightly more in depth into this. Okay, so the traditional like Montague grammar solution that I think Tanuj is getting upon is like decomposing a utterance into a logical formalism structure. So instead of saying the rabbit horn does not exist, which requires us to postulate a rabbit horn, which doesn't exist, right? We instead decompose this into there is no x such that x is a horn, x is a rabbit's, or x is of a rabbit, and x exists. And maybe my usage of the x exists here predicate is wrong. So I think I did pull this example directly off of a paper, but yeah, I mean, okay, so
This is used to describe the actual rabbit.
yeah, right. I mean, it's not wrong in this scenario, but I see what you mean where if you have existence as a predicate, it can cause some like complications. Okay, so this is the traditional like grammarian, like Western grammar solution. Nyaya does a similar thing, right? They decompose these non-referring expressions into compositions of real things. So like horns are real, rabbits are real. We can decompose these non-referring expressions into those different real components. Phrases can be decomposed, right? If we say the rabbit's horn does not exist, it's very easy to decompose it. But what about compounds, right? I think it was Chris, right? You said how like we're unsure what rabbit horn means. If we're sure of what rabbit horn means, can we still pull the utterances apart, right? Like can we still pull the individual phrases of it apart? We at least know that we can't apply the same syntactic rules to do these rewrites, right? The Montague grammar solution of where we simply take the syntax, the way Montague grammar works is that we have some syntactic tree, right? Right, something like this, and then we literally convert this into a lambda calculus expression. So like ix dot lambda uno, right? Like you construct this logical expression that represents the truth value, the semantic meaning of this tree. But if you have a unitary rabbit horn, the word rabbit horn here as a unitary phrase over here, your lambda calculus is going to preserve this as one of your components. And that's obviously a problem because you still maintain them rabbit horn. So this is another problem that like I don't want to go into, but this idea of phrases being or like compound words being unitary runs you into a lot of problems that haven't necessarily been addressed by the analytic tradition, like in the West. Okay, cool. Then there's a couple types of negation. This is sort of related to what we were talking about last week with law of excluded middle. So the Buddhists will say that there's actually two types of negation. Negation they call pratishedha. One of them is paryudasa, which is implicative negation, which means that it implies the opposite. Like it makes an active statement. So if we say glass, if we say the glass is non-red, we are basically asserting that the glass is a color and that color is non-red. Whereas if we say the glass is not red, we're instead not making any assertion about the color of the glass. We're simply stating that it's not red. So the glass is non-red implies that the glass is a color and that color is non-red. Whereas the glass is not red implies that it makes no assertion about anything. It simply negates the utterance of the glass being red. It's harder to say this in linguistic terms, but it's pretty easy to say in terms of like logical terms, whether you're making a assertion or not. So we can say the rabbit horn does not exist, and that's non-implicative. It doesn't assert anything, and therefore it's not fallacious, right? We're not asserting anything about the existence of the rabbit horn. We're simply negating, non-implicatively negating its existence. So that's not fallacious. On the other hand, if we say the rabbit horn is non-sharp, that's implicative negation. And that then becomes fallacious. The rabbit horn is non-sharp is fallacious because it makes an assertion about the rabbit horn, and an implicative assertion. So I think everyone would be on board with saying that the rabbit horn is sharp is fallacious, right? The rabbit horn is sharp. Is this true or not? Or is this even like semantically valid? Like, can we judge the truth of this? Like, can we judge the truth value of the rabbit horn is sharp? Like, I wouldn't say so, right? The rabbit horn is non-sharp. Can we judge the truth value of that? Like, it's sort of more blurry, right? Because non-sharp, like the rabbit horn doesn't exist in the first place, but we're still saying it's non-sharp, right? Like something that doesn't exist, does it have the quality of being non-sharp?
For example, like if I said Rohan's panties are not red, we're not implying that that's panties, you know?
Yeah, exactly. This is also like related to the logical fallacy of like assuming the, what's it called? Like assuming the premises, or like, does anyone know what this is called? It's like yeah, or assuming the conclusion as your premise, right? Like taking the conclusion as your premise. It's called something like that, right? Begging the question is,
These ones are just built on false premises. Like you're assuming that the panties exist. When they don't.
yeah, exactly. But it's like, no, but I mean, it's like building like your predicate into your subject, right? Like when you make an assertion, you have like your subject and you're asserting some predicate of it, right? But if we build the predicate into the subject, right? If we have a predicate over here, then anything over here becomes like invalid, right? Like we can't even judge the truth value of this because the subject itself is semantically
A lot
broken.
of arguments for the existence of God feel that way. even if that's
Interesting.
like
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're gonna be looking at God in like 3 weeks. But yeah, that'll be an interesting discussion. So yeah, asserts rabbit horn. So that makes it fallacious, right? Because it's implicative negation. It still implies some. It asserts some property of the rabbit horn. Cool. Any thoughts here? Any thoughts on like law of excluded middle, Milo? Okay. All right. Huh? Circular, like how? Oh, circularity would. No, I don't think so. Circularity would be like if our subject, circularity would be like if our predicate required our subject in order to be true, or if our if our subject, actually it's related to circularity. I guess I guess it's it's a sub. All right. Circularity is a subclass of this logical phenomenon where this predicate is the same as this predicate, right? Where the predicate that you're assuming in your subject is the predicate that you're asserting. But like what we're talking about over here is a more general case where this could be P1. Right. Am I right? Like I don't know. I might be messed up here, but okay, cool. Last slide. All right. Do universal properties exist? What do we mean when we say universal property? We mean like things like this, right? These like intentional definitions, these jotties. Do universal properties exist? Okay. Nyaya realism. So the Nyaya school says that universal properties do exist. They're real. If we take this idea, so like when they say they're real, they literally think that like this property of like evenness exists like somewhere, maybe not like physically, but like there is a universe of there's like a realm of properties, and those properties are like truly existent in some sense, like they exist outside of the mind. And the problem we run into is like what if we can just say everything, like every property is like is a truly existent property, right? Like being a black phoneness, right? Like, oh, being a black phoneness exists somewhere. And they say no, that would be absurd. Only certain truly existent jatis that meet certain conditions truly exist. They're real. And we list out those properties over here, those 6 properties. A universal cannot inhere in fewer than 2 things, right? It can't just be a particular, they can't lead to infinite regress and so on, right? They have all these stipulations for what makes a jati like truly like a real jati. The Buddhists, on the other hand, take a nominalist position. So nominalism versus realism is like the standard kind of debate in with respect to words, right? Nominalism says that like these words only exist in like only exist in like our mental cognition of their meaning, which I think is the opinion most people would take, right? Does anyone here think that like the meanings of words truly exist in some objective sense, maybe not physically, but outside of the mind, there was like some platonic realm of ideals in which like word meanings exist? Does anyone think this is true? Okay, I'm gonna have like an interesting like proof of this. Okay. We can talk about it after this, but like I mean, first let me just go over like nominalism. Was there another question? I thought I heard a voice real quick. Yeah, mathematical Platonism. But I will make a proof of word meaning through mathematical Platonism. Like I will make a proof that if you believe mathematical Platonism is true, you have to believe like word meaning is true. Yeah. Obviously a very hand wavy like philosophy proof. Like no, it's not a mathematical proof. I wish maybe in a few years. Maybe that'll be my senior thesis. Yeah. But I mean, if it's yeah. If it's true, then there's a proof for it, right? So like if it's just a matter of proving it, right? But I don't know. I don't want to get into like proof theoretic questions of like, oh, provability versus truth. Okay. All right. So the Buddhists developed the theory of Apoha nominalism, where they basically say there are. So this is like they say that like meanings only exist in our minds, right? They only apply to these raw particulars, and they specifically have this metaphysical component, kind of requirement of svalakshana. So they believe in this idea that everything, like there are only momentary particulars. There is no permanent existence. Everything is transitory. There is no world out there that stays the same. There's only these momentary svalakshanas. And in order to abide by this, you have to obviously, like you can't postulate the existence of a world of jatis out there, right? Like this universe of permanent property meanings, you have to say everything is momentary. So in order to do that, they basically come up with this Apoha theory based on this interesting form of negation. So basically they say that the meaning of cow, so X is a cow, so like cow of X means like X is a cow, X is a cow. X is a cow is the same as saying X is not in the set of elements such that that element is a non-cow. Does that make sense? This didn't make sense to me for a long time, and it still barely makes sense. But basically, this relies on the difference between implicative and non-implicative negation. The law of excluded middle only applies to implicative negation. The outer negation here is non-implicative. The one like, can I do that? The first not, the X not in, that one is non-implicative, which means that double nesting that not with the inner not does not result in itself, right? Thus, cow of X is not equal to not non-cow Y, or that should be an X over there. But those are not the same because the law of excluded middle does not apply to non-implicative negation. But like another way to think about this is like we have a set of non-cows. Non-cow is not a universal property. It is like the commitment they want to make, like the commitment they want to avoid is the existence of universal properties, and they're trying to get around that by like postulating this like non-cow, like this like non-cowedness. And by saying X is not in that set, they basically get around, they like try to do this mental gymnastics to like hop around the Nyaya postulation that like these universal conditions like cowedness exist. Yeah.
So these, is three only a That's a very interesting question. I'd say three. I think that they'd say that three doesn't exist because three is a universal property, right? Three is a jati. Three applies to like here's three. But it doesn't exist outside of this svalakshana, right? The svalakshana here is like the perception of like these three objects. But they'd say that like threeness doesn't exist in any objective way.
So this section only works because in English we use non-blank to mean something that is in the same property as the blank, but not that. Like in the same category.
But this is not simply a feature of English. This is a feature of
No, but like the
logic
distinction
itself.
between not blank versus non.
No. I mean, the distinction between not and non here is simply an English rendition of an underlying logical phenomenon of implicative negation versus non-implicative negation. In intuitionistic logic, right? So like we have intuitionistic logical systems that deny the law of excluded middle. And
Doesn't implicative just mean like it exists and it's not that? Like, isn't that all it is?
so like the law of excluded middle says like not X or X, right? Implicative negation is this not. But they also like non-implicative negation is this like other X. I mean, this is like not actual, like this is like not the actual notation, but like non-X does not Oh shit. Yeah, you're right. Not X or X, right? This is non-X. It is fair to say non-X and X. I think like
Yeah, wait. Yeah. Yeah, oh, non-X does not imply. Non-X does not imply. Not. Yeah, something like that. Right, that like double negation doesn't apply to this. But double negation does result in this. So the point is that there's like this is the form of negation that intuitionistic logic takes, and this is the form of negation that like classical logic takes. But they're not the same. This is like definitely like the wrong way to think about this. I'm sure there's a better way to think about this. But yeah, something like that. But like the point is that like this isn't simply a feature of English or like language. Like you can structure your negation such that double negation doesn't cancel out. And that's like an important feature of like that's like the core reason this argument supposedly works. Cool. Okay, any other questions here? Okay. Oh wait, whoops. Okay, wait. All right. All right. The slide there. Okay, wait. First let me stop this. Okay, awesome. Thank you.